Hi friends, welcome back to 5 Minute Modern, where in 5 minutes or less we learn about an important artist, artwork, or concept in the history of modern art. My name is Cindy, and today we're considering the limits of performance art. And just one note before we dive in, today we'll be discussing performance pieces which deal with violence against women. This may be upsetting for some viewers. I encourage you to use your discretion in deciding whether this video is right for you or not. Most of the time, we think of there being a clear boundary between the performer and the spectator. As an audience, we consider ourselves impartial and ultimately inconsequential observers of the performance before us. Yoko Ono is definitely having a moment right now with a new biography of her just published, and increased interest in her unique body of artistic work. So let's begin today with Cut Piece, in which she examined the boundary between spectator and participant by inviting the audience to take part in the performance. Conceived in 1964, the piece was performed at Carnegie Hall in New York in 1965. In the piece, Ono sat still on stage with a pair of scissors beside her, and allowed audience members to come up to the stage and use the scissors to cut off pieces of her clothing. For the first several minutes of the 1965 performance, audience members made small cuts at the edges of Ono's outfit, but eventually a young man came up to the stage and made multiple dramatic cuts until Ono was stripped down to her underwear. In her own writing on the piece, in her famous 1964 book, Grapefruit, Ono offers only a single instruction for how the piece should be carried out. Cut. Notes on Ono's performances of the piece continue by stating that the performer does not necessarily have to be a woman. And yet, as I watch the piece, I feel that the actual performance of it is at odds with these notes. Though she wrote that the performer does not necessarily have to be a woman, seeing Ono on stage in her underwear as a man cut her clothes away, it feels impossible for me to disentangle this piece from the misogynistic objectification of women that often leads to acts of violence. The performer may not have to be a woman, but I have to wonder if a man would even be capable of conceiving of a piece like this. But to label Ono or any other performer of this piece as a mere victim of misogyny isn't quite right either. As author and critic Maggie notes of this piece, there is a deep contradiction at its heart. We feel a sense of concern, perhaps even injustice for Ono as her clothing is cut, and yet Ono herself invited the cutting. She didn't lay beside her a feather or even a marker. She deliberately chose scissors. In 1974, Serbian artist Marina Abramović would push the concept even further in a piece titled Rhythm Zero. In the piece, Abramović stood motionless for 6 hours while audience members chose from 72 objects to use on her. These objects ranged from a feather, a rose, an olive oil, to a needle, a scalpel, and a gun. Over the course of the piece, audience members cut Abramović and drank her blood. One even loaded the gun and held Abramović's finger over the trigger before others intervened. Why would Abramović subject herself to such a horrifying ordeal? Why would Ono? Although I can't speak for the artists, of course, I have to wonder if both are pointing to something known as the bystander effect, a psychological phenomenon which states that individuals are less likely to intervene if there are more people present. Responsibility is diffused across a group of onlookers, so no one person feels they have to act. You've probably heard of the case of Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old woman stabbed to death in 1964, the same year Ono first conceived Cut Piece. Initial reports claimed that 38 bystanders had witnessed Genovese's murder without trying to intervene. Though later investigations would prove that initial reporting untrue, the legend points to the very real bystander effect, which we see at work in Ono and Abramović's pieces. Perhaps both artists are challenging us to break from the idea that simply watching something is neutral. Failing to take action is itself an action. There's no such thing as an innocent bystander. Thanks so much for watching this one. I know these pieces are upsetting, but I do think they raise important questions for us about how we choose to show up for our fellow humans. And what better way to deal with challenging conversations than through art? Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.